everybody, Darlicia Menzie here, your favorite realtor of Menzie Makes Moves Real Estate, powered by Berkshire Hathaway Home Services Select Properties. Ooh, child. We are back with another episode of Real Estate Tidbits, where we talk about the Ohhhs and Whoooooos of real estate. Questions are welcome. Conversation is expected. Let's go. All right. So today's episode, we're going to be talking about surviving the storm. I thought that was a pretty provocative title, considering what we're going to be talking about today. And that being what happens during a real estate transaction when there is loss or damage to a property that is under contract. So I live here in the St. Louis area, more specifically in Lake St. Louis, and I service the greater St. Louis area. But here recently, at the end of September, the city of Wentzville, Missouri, experienced a major hailstorm. I mean, come on, end of September, top of October, and we're talking about hailstorm. That's pretty crazy within itself, but it happened. And several hundreds of homeowners are now having to file insurance claims on what they have experienced as major damage to their home. Okay, so we were talking about this. We was talking about this during our meetings this week at my office. And I told you guys that with this podcast, I'm going to be bringing you information as I experience it, as I learn it, as I engage with it, as I learn from it, all of the good things. So since this is a more recent piece of news, I thought it would be fitting to share this with you guys. Did you know that there is a specific part of the contract, specifically for us here in Missouri? It's paragraph 14 of the residential sales contract that talks about what happens during loss or damage to a property when it is under contract. So I'm going to be breaking that down for you. If you're a seller, I want you to listen in for what sellers are responsible for. If you are a buyer, I want you to listen in to what your options are. I'm going to read the paragraph verbatim and break it down for you so that you can have a greater understanding. I'm also going to be showing you just a couple of headlines of what was in the news during this storm and just kind of go over what that means now. What are some next steps for homeowners and for home purchasers? Okay, so first things first is we're going to read verbatim the loss portion of the residential sales contract for the state of Missouri as it is written, what is this, October 3rd, 2023, or whenever you're hearing this podcast. So let me pull it up. All right, we're going to go line by line. I'm going to have it up on the screen for those who are there. But if not, listen in. It's chapter. It's paragraph 14, and it's called loss. So it says, risk of loss to the improvements of the property shall be borne by the seller until title is transferred. So that sentence alone lets me know that this is still the property of a homeowner, of the seller. So anything that happens to that property is still their responsibility. If any improvements covered by this contract are damaged or destroyed, i.e. a hailstorm, seller shall immediately notify buyer or selling broker in writing of the damage or destruction, the amount of the insurance proceeds payable, if any, and whether the seller intends to restore the property prior to closing to its condition at the time of the contract. So let's slow that down really quickly. Seller is to notify buyer immediately of damage that's happened to the home. That can be a hailstorm. That could be water that has pipe has burst and it's damaged the floors or the drywall or the what have you. There's several things. Tornado that happened here in the St. Louis and Illinois area about 2 years ago. While a house is under contract, right? What happens for the buyer? What happens for the seller? So this next sentence is letting us know if there's any damage. One, you need to let the buyer know that there's damage to the property or destruction. You need to let them know the amount of insurance proceeds payable. So how much insurance is going to be paid out to cover this particular damage or destruction. And then if you're intending to restore the property back to its original condition in the way that the buyer saw it as when they wrote an offer on the home. Okay, so boom, let's go. In the event the seller restores the property to its prior condition before scheduled closing and provides buyer with proof of the repairs, the buyer and the seller shall proceed with closing. So damage happens to the home. Seller says, I got it. I'm going to take care of it before closing. Now you just need to provide proof of the receipts and that the work was done. You're good to move forward with closing if you both agree to that. Next part. In the event the property is not to be restored to its prior condition, seller says, I don't have the money, I don't have the time, I don't have the interest, I'm not doing anything to this home, okay? By the seller before closing, the seller shall immediately provide buyer or selling broker with a copy of any policies of insurance. So here's the deal. Maybe it's a situation where contractors are backed up and they can't come and see the house, or the seller has decided that they're not going to do whatever it is, right? It says now that the seller shall immediately provide the buyer or the buyer's agent with a copy of any policies of insurance, the name and number of the agent of each of those said policies, so things that you're filing claims on, and written authorization, if needed, for the buyer to communicate with the insurer. So the least that you do, seller, is to put the buyer in contact and make them aware of what insurance policy is at play here and the person or the people that they ought to contact in order to see that claim through. Okay, let's go on. Okay, the buyer may either A, proceed with closing and be entitled to the amount of insurance proceeds relating to real property improvements, if any, payable to seller under all policies insuring the improvements, plus receive a credit from the seller at closing in an amount equal to the deductible not covered by insurance. Let's slow down there. So one, the buyer is either going to take the payout for that particular work that needs to be done, plus the deductible amount that the seller would have paid to get it done. So we got to keep that's two payouts in mind, if you will. The amount for the repair or the redoing of whatever was damaged or destroyed, and the amount of the deductible that the seller must pay in order to get the insurance to do what they do, right? So that's option A. Option B is to terminate the contract, thereby releasing all parties from liability thereunder. So your option is to take the money there. If the seller's not going to take care of the issue of the home, the damage of the home, then they have the option to file the claim. The money that's going to be given by the insurance company after the adjuster comes out and be given to the buyer, plus the amount of the deductible. Or the buyer can say, no go, we're not going to move forward, and they can terminate the contract legally. Legally, they can terminate the contract. All right, so now that we know the two options that the buyer has, let's continue on. If all of the aforementioned insurance information is received by the buyer or selling broker more than 10 days prior to the scheduled closing date, buyer is to give written notification to the seller or listing broker as to his election of A or B above within 10 days after the buyer or selling broker's receipt of such information. Let's slow that down real quick, okay? So, if the information is received by the buyer prior to 10 days before, so 10 plus days before closing date, right? 10 plus days before the closing date, the buyer is to give written notification to the seller of which one he's going to choose, A or B, within 10 days. Okay, so if you have more than 10 days notification, then you have 10 days to give them notice. That's what that's saying right there. Let's keep going. And if not received by the buyer or selling broker more than 10 days prior to the scheduled closing date, the buyer may, at buyer's option and by written notice to the seller or listing broker, extend the closing date up to 10 days, during which time the buyer may make his election as to A or B above. Let's slow that down. So the first thing was, if it's 10 days or more, you have 10 days to be able to notify them of what you want to do. If it's less than 10 days before the closing date, now you get the option to extend your closing timeline 10 additional days so that you can make your decision. That's what this is saying. Okay. Failure by buyer to notify seller shall constitute an election to terminate this contract. So if the buyer does not tell the seller anything within their 10 days, this is them basically saying this contract is dead and I'm terminating. If the contract is terminated in accordance with the provisions of this paragraph, buyer's earnest money is to be returned, subject to paragraph 12. So paragraph 12 talks about earnest money and what happens with that earnest money over time in the event that anything specific shall happen. And so we'll get into earnest money another time. I'm not going to take time today to do that, but we'll get into earnest money another time. But this is saying here that legally that buyer can get their earnest money back. And if you know anything about earnest money is about 1%, typically 1% of purchase price. So it's a good chunk of money that's on the line here. So the buyer's earnest money is to be returned subject to paragraph 12. Seller agrees to reimburse buyer's costs. Listen up, sellers. You agree at this point to reimburse buyer's costs to pay for title, survey, inspections, and appraisal. Because remember, now we're only 10 days out or so from closing. So that means all of these things have been taken care of, mostly that these deadlines have been met, the contingencies have been met. And so now the buyers have paid this money out to get these things done. And if it's decided that they're not going to move forward with this home, the seller is liable and responsible to pay these 4 things back to the seller. The title, which is several $100s. A survey, another several $100s. Inspection, another several $100s. And the appraisal, another $700. That could be almost up to $2,000 under. So something to be mindful of, that even though this was not your doing, it was an act of God, if you will, or a lightning, or a hailstorm, or tornado, or whatever the case may be, or again, a burst pipe, or whatever is going on with the home. Now you have to enter into this process, if you will, with buyer on what's going to happen with this home at this point. Are they going to be moving forward? If they're going to be moving forward, here are some things to consider, some contingencies. Here are some payouts. Here are some processes. If they're not going to be moving forward, be prepared to pay for these other additional fees in reimbursement to the buyer. Wanted to share with you guys a few things that were impacted by this storm in Wentzville, Missouri, and headlines even said that this was considered a catastrophe by insurance companies in the area. This hailstorm was considered a catastrophe. And again, hundreds of homes, hundreds of families were impacted by this storm. But here are some things that I want you to consider and some next steps for you if you were impacted by that storm, or if anything like this were to happen to you in the future during a real estate transaction. So first, things that happened during this hailstorm that were impacted: roofs now need to be replaced, siding completely damaged, and that's a whole house, like not even just a part of a house, because the hail was coming from every direction because the wind was extremely volatile as well. Awnings in your backyard, in your front yard, screens to windows and to patios and porches. Windows were burst or cracked, broken. Even ice entering into people's homes and into their garages. Cars were dented, and now they're having to file claims for that as well. Plants. We know that landscaping is as well another huge part of curb appeal and the satisfaction of your home and your yard, and that was impacted as well. Gutters, soffits and fascia, garages, garage doors and windows, patios and decks. Like things that you wouldn't necessarily think about being damaged were damaged because of this hailstorm. And now families are having to file these large claims to get work done on their house. Now, the upside of that is now they're going to have new almost everything. But the downside to that is now they're having to go through this process of filing a claim and paying these deductibles. And for some, this is an inconvenience. This is an inconvenience fee, and it's an inconvenient time to be taking care of all of this. And so if you're a praying person, I encourage you to pray for these families and join me in praying for these families and believing that they'll just experience favor with the insurance companies and with the contractors that are coming their way. So something else interesting that I found out while I was looking up articles about this is that there are some scammers out there who heard about the storm, scamming contractors, right, and from out of state and wherever else, that are wanting to take advantage of this opportunity. So be careful if you're one of those families impacted, or if something like this happens to you in the future. Be careful, be leery, be observant, be wise about who it is that you do business with. Make sure that you do your homework and you look at the reviews. Make sure you're having conversations with others and getting referrals. If you need referrals for any of these, reach out to me and I can get you a referral as well, because we want you to work with someone trusted, someone that has been used by me or other agents in my office, other families in my my office as well. So these are things to keep in mind. Next steps is to go ahead and call your insurance company. Don't assume that you have to foot this bill on your own or do the work on your own. That's what you have insurance for. That's what you have warranties for. This is exactly the time to go ahead and take advantage of the things that you have been paying for all of this time, hoping that nothing happened, but preparing for if something does. So go ahead and give your insurance company a call. Let them know what's going on. They'll be able to let you know how soon they can get an adjuster out there to take a look at your property and to give you those estimates and quotes with the contractors that you're working with. And hopefully, get you a good start. Get you another good start. I hope that this has been helpful for you guys today. I would love to be your realtor if you're here in the St. Louis area. I want you to go and visit my website at MenziMakesMoves.com or give me a call at 618-305-4498. And guess what? Even if you're not in the St. Louis area and you do not have a realtor to represent you, I can find you a qualified realtor in your area, no matter what state you're in, and get you somebody that you can work with and that you can trust. And I'm there along with you in the process so that you aren't alone with somebody that you don't really know. So give me a shout. Visit my YouTube page, you guys. Check out the podcast on Spotify. Hit up my Facebook page, my Instagram page, and just connect with me in general. I love being in communication with you guys. Let me leave you with something encouraging today. What I want to leave you with today is to read your contracts. Know what you are coming into agreement with. I want you to be aware of your part and be aware of the other party's part as well. We can't be out here blindly accepting and agreeing to anything just because we have an established relationship, or just because we're excited and eager about what's going on, or just because we're upset about what's going on. I want you to slow it on down just a little bit and make sure you read your contracts. Make sure you read what's going on. Okay? I believe in you guys. And I believe that you can have an amazing real estate experience. I believe that you play a major part in that, as well as your representative, your real estate consultant, your agent plays a huge part of that as well. But when you work together as a team, as we talked about last time, you can make beautiful things happen. I'm so glad we had this time together, just to sing a song or dance or two. Seems like just as soon as we got started, it was time to say so long. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. Until next time.